Good morning.
Good morning.
Great conference. I'm Dick Dieter. I'm with the Death Penalty Information Center, and I want to talk about a report I recently did for the center on veterans and the death penalty. Veterans, as this slide, whoops, don't want to go too fast here. Let's get back to this. As this slide indicates, are receiving much more respect than they did, say, in the Vietnam era when they were coming back and often criticized for participating in the war. Now we recognize the value of veterans. We honor them at sports events. We honor them at the airport. But when it comes to the death penalty, there seems to be a disconnect. And that's what this report is about, telling some of the stories of vets who have been executed or who are on death row. You probably have heard the story of Manny Babbitt, who was one of only 13 people who've been executed in California. You know, it's got to be the worst of the worst. But of course, sorry. I don't think I'm clicking, but got a lot of energy. Manny Babbitt served in Vietnam in one of the worst places in Khe Sanh, and he was responsible for picking up dead bodies and, you know, helicoptering out the wounded. He was awarded a Purple Heart, and when he got back from Vietnam, he had a series of PTSD and mental problems. A murder was committed. His brother, Bill, recognized that, you know, Manny might have been the person who did it because he had a cigarette lighter, I think, from the victim, and turned his brother in with the assurances that this wouldn't be a death penalty case. But in fact, you know, it went through the system. Manny was executed in the gas chamber in 1999. Governor Gregg Davis, also a Vietnam vet, had the opportunity to commute him, said, well, you know, a lot of people have been through a lot of trauma. That's no excuse for what happened here, sort of that amnesia that Mike Meltzer talked about, you know, the death penalty illness, so to speak. And so his case stands for that. But that was 1999, and maybe we've learned a lot. Well, this is a case of a man who was executed, Andrew Brannon. Last year, the first person executed was a Vietnam vet who suffered so badly from PTSD that he had 100% disability from the Veterans Administration. The crime was, you know, he was stopped by the police for a traffic violation. All of a sudden, he started to get agitated because his mental problems were emerging, and he took you know, he just couldn't cooperate with the police and took a gun out of his truck and shot the police officer. It was the only kind of bizarre incident like that, but, you know, he was executed in Georgia despite all of that, despite the, you know, the newfound respect that we have for veterans. It's somehow just not getting through. Sometimes it even involves innocent defendants. We all know Leonel Herrera from the case of Herrera in 1993 that was decided by the Supreme Court on other issues. But it turns out, you know, Leonel Herrera was also a veteran, a Vietnam vet. His mother describes, you know, what it was like when he came back from the war, the PTSD he suffered. I mean, obviously, if you're making an innocence claim, you don't want to say, and if you don't believe that, well, the reason that I might have done it was mental illness and PTSD. But, you know, Kirk Bloodsworth, Marine, Ray Crone, Air Force in the war, all, and many others have been exonerated. Not that veterans are to be treated differently just because they're veterans, but this is a bigger problem. I was completely surprised when I started investigating this issue and found that military people just didn't know how many veterans have been executed, how many veterans are on death row, what's being especially done about their cases. And it's just the federal level, too. This is Lewis Jones. Only 3 people have been executed on the federal level in the modern day. Lewis Jones, again, he was in the Gulf War with the whole chemicals that were released there in the Gulf War syndrome and other PTSD, was executed by the federal government. Others remain on death row. Robert Fisher in Pennsylvania, there he is getting his Purple Heart from the president. Later, you know, he gets the death penalty, and he still could face execution despite that. Here you have James Davis on death row right now in North Carolina. Oops, another jump there. It doesn't want to give you that slide. He's getting his medals for his service, and he remains in a kind of mental illness state, volunteering for execution. These are very sad cases and ought to be given more attention. The Supreme Court did give it some attention in Porter versus McCullum, and you know, unanimously overturned his death sentence, a Korean War veteran. Of course, they had to find a legal reason, ineffectiveness of counsel. But you know, still, I don't think that this is completely dawned, not just on prosecutors and governors, but on defense attorneys, that this has got to be more closely recognized. That many as 80% of people coming back from Vietnam 20 years later had symptoms of PTSD. And of course, Iraq and Afghanistan vets, you know, huge numbers of people are affected by this. And it needs to be brought out at trial. It needs to be presented even before it gets to trial, that this shouldn't be a death penalty case. These are the kinds of things that people with PTSD have been through. You know, witnessing the remains of dead bodies and actually carrying out killings and causing the deaths of others. That's what leaves them in such a way. And of course, this is connected, I think, thank you, with I should really shut up. It's connected to the broader issue of mental illness, because people on death row who are not veterans also had childhoods of sexual abuse, of poverty, of violence all around them. And once we don't know how many of those there are either. I mean, that I think is part of the problem here, that there's this great unknown about veterans, great unknown about mental illness, and maybe if we address this problem with veterans as a sympathetic group, we could more broadly address some of the problems with mental illness. Thank you.
So yeah, we should definitely grab a copy of the DPIC report that Dick wrote. It's out in the information tables. Anyone have questions for Dick? All right.
Richard, to the extent you have an intuition, I take it you don't have any hard data. When defense counsel really plays this, is it effective?
Well, there's a hesitation to do it because it conjures up maybe somebody who is a future danger, somebody who is got an illness that you know, is going to be a problem all through their lives. So I've talked to defense attorneys, and they say sometimes we know it and we don't use it as strongly as we could. You know, I think when a case gets late in the day, appeals and clemency, there's sort of this machinery that keeps going. I'm not sure why it's not more effective to stop this. Another veteran was executed this year. Another veteran was almost executed the other night. So I think it needs to, what Mexico, which has citizens, Mexican citizens in the U.S. on their death rows, what they do is get involved pre-trial and make presentations to the prosecutor and you know, provide translation and all that cultural stuff, and prevent the case from going to the death, to trial on a capital level. And I think that's where the emphasis needs to be. Sympathy could be garnered that there's enough. And I think we don't know, you know, how much success and how much failure there is, because I think there's about 10% of people on death row are vets, but we don't know exactly how much more there could have been, et cetera. So.
Is there any, here I am, is there any pattern to homicides by veterans? Is it always with guns? Is it always impulsive? Is it always...
You know, I wouldn't say always, but yes. I mean, the cases that I looked at are bizarre. People they didn't know, or family members with whom they're having very difficult relationships. It's not always the case of, you know, murder for profit somehow, sort of murder for gain. It's sort of the violence that breaks out either in a family or, you know, Lewis Jones, a federal case, goes on to a military base and abducts a woman and rapes and kills her out of the blue. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, some of these crimes. Andrew Brannon, you know, you don't get that angry to shoot a police officer just over a traffic stop, but he did. He had been living in a tent. He had years of mental illness, so it springs out of something. I mean, I don't think PTSD is the whole answer, but the crimes are often very unusual.
Thank you, Dick.